Hi, I'm Ben Wojdyla. Today on Saturday Mechanic, we're going to talk about Bondo. It happens to everybody. You get a dent in your car and it's very frustrating and it can be very expensive to get it fixed, but you can also fix it at home with just a little bit of practice. We have bought this hood so that I don't have to dent my own, and I'm going to show you how to do it in sort of a cooking show format. I'm going to make a dent here, fill it like this, sand it down, paint it, and then we're going to polish it to match the rest of the color. First thing we need to talk about is what the heck is Bondo, or body filler as they call it. It's actually a polyester resin. You add a hardener, mix it together, and what happens is you get an exothermic reaction and it hardens up real quick. And after a little bit of cure time, it's actually something that you can sand down smooth with the surface of the paint. It looks kind of like bubble gum actually when you're done, but we've got some here that's already hard, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But first we got to make a dent to show you how the process starts. All right, I've got old hickory here, ball peen hammer, but this could very well happen with some kid's toy, or I recently found out golf ball sized hail. That was a joy, but here we're going to make a dent right here. Now it's not a real big dent that I've made. Apparently I'm weak today, but that's enough to cause you a couple $100 worth of body repair. So we're going to do that right here with this Bondo process. So you don't actually put Bondo directly onto the paint. It's not a good bonding surface. You actually sand it down through the paint and through the primer right down to the bare metal. Expect when you're doing this for your spot to grow and grow and grow, because as you sand and then prime it and then paint, it gets bigger, like the space gets bigger and bigger. So a little dent like this will end up being a pretty good size repair space, but that's okay. That's sort of how this works. So we're gonna start with our orbital sander. I've got a 120 grit sandpaper on here, which is pretty aggressive, but that's what we're doing. We're taking paint off, so we're gonna get going. All right, so we're down through the paint, through the primer, and right to the bare metal. Now, since this dent was made with a ball peen hammer, it's going to be really hard to get all that paint out of the bottom, since it's a really steep pitch right in the bottom there. But in the real world, you'll be able to get all the way down to the bottom. When you're sanding, be careful not to dwell on that spot too long though, because the action of the sandpaper against the metal actually heats it up from the friction. And if you put too much heat into the sheet metal, it'll warp and cause much bigger problems. So take your time, sand it down, get down to the base metal, and from here, we can get going with adding some Bondo. Bondo comes in two parts. This is what makes up the base material here. It's this sort of gray goo. And you can leave it in this state for however long. The thing that makes it hard is actually this stuff. It's called a cream hardener. And this is red. And you squeeze out just a little bit of it like that. And then it gets mixed together with this. When you're doing Bondo, you only have a little bit of time. So you really get maybe 5 minutes of work time with this stuff. So be very certain that you're ready to go. Well, I got some on my finger. Be very certain you're ready to go when you're using it. You should probably have a spatula and work in an aerated space when you're doing this stuff, because this is pretty stinky. And it's definitely off-gassing. So what you're going for is a color that matches these paddles. This is a spreading paddle for Bondo, and the closer you can get to this, the better quality of a material or of a fix it's going to be. So what you do, or what I do anyway, is mix them together on one of these plastic boards. You just want to blend it together. Work quickly, but don't rush. Thing is, the stuff's so cheap, it's like $5 to $7 bucks for this can, that you can afford to chuck it if it gets too hard too fast. So that's pretty good right there. What we're going to do, scoop this up and get it on an edge. And now I'm going to put it right onto this spot. And like I said before, if you've ever done drywall, it's a very similar idea. You want to add just enough to cover the spot, but not so much that you're going to end up sanding it down forever and ever and ever. You also have the option of going back and adding more later. So if you let it cure and sand it down and there's still a little bit of a hole in there, or a divot or whatever, if there's any little specks of space in there, feel free to go back, mix some more, add it on top, make sure everything's clean and dusted off, but you can keep adding back and forth until you get a nice level surface. Don't add anything more than about 1/4 of an inch of Bondo at any time, and even that's pushing it. You want to go for a very light amount on any car. Everybody always hears about the Bondo bandits. It's horrible, horrible repairs that happen to unassuming cars, and it's very, very common to go hunting for a used car and just find cars loaded with Bondo, and you don't want to do that. You want to have a reasonably good repair here. So 1/4 inch at most, 1/8 inch is better. And what we're going to do now is since that's going to take some time to sit, usually about 2 hours is a good time. Well, it says just let it set for 20 to 30 minutes on the can. Thing is, getting the ratio perfect between the base material and the hardener is sometimes a little off. More hardener or more cream hardener, it'll cure faster. Less, it'll take more time. Generally, I like to let it sit for 2 hours. There's no harm in letting it sit longer. So we're going to let that sit, but in that meantime, we've already got a spot that's prepped, and we're going to move on to that one to show you how to do that. The word that you're going to hear from this point forward a lot is feathering. The idea is to blend your repair into the rest of the surface. And the edge that we do that on, you want to feather that edge. That's what it's called. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our more aggressive sandpaper and knock down this surface because it's really sloppy, and any body filler guy is going to laugh at that. So I got to cover that up really quick. So we're going to start with our sander again. And I've got 220 grit on here, which is way more aggressive than it needs to be, but I want to move through this first phase quickly. And I'm also going to swap this out for a finer grit pretty quick. So we're going to get started. So now we've got a much finer grit, and we're going to keep going. I'll show you what I'm doing now. This is where we're going to start to feather this edge in. So you can see here it's still a little bit funky, but on this edge we're starting to see what we want to get is that nice blend into the rest of the bodywork, or into the surface of the paint, I guess. But we're going to keep going and try to get all those edges nice and smooth. All right, so now that we're pretty close, you want to start using your hand to feel if this surface is flat and level. This is where the magic comes in. This is where guys who are well practiced in body work earn their money. You get down low and you feel with your hand that it's level, and you also look with your eyes. You want to get real low, but this is actually easier when it's dark out. You put a light on the side here at a steep angle, and you look to see if it's high or low. If it's high, you just sand it down a little bit more. If it's low, you add more Bondo and repeat the process. This is feeling just a little bit low, but I am not super motivated to add more Bondo. So we're going to keep going with our primer and continue the process. All right, so when we get to our primer phase, we're actually going to start by cleaning all the dust off. You want to have a nice clean towel or rag that you can make sure to get everything off. Last thing you want is particles in here because it'll screw up your finish down the road. What I've got for our primer is a nice high build formula. That means it's kind of thick, so it'll fill in any small, tiny imperfections really easily, scratches, that kind of thing. So we're going to lay that down real slow at first and probably build up 2 or 3 layers. So just let that sit for just a second. I've got a very, very thin layer, right? And if you're doing this on your own car, you'll probably want to mask off this area so that what you get is overspray. So little tiny particles will end up over here, so then you'll have to end up polishing over here too, which is a giant pain in the butt. But Yeah, just use painter's tape and a little plastic or something like that and just mask off the area so it can find your work. That's probably dry enough to put down another coat. Doesn't take real long to do this part. And the key is to do it slowly. Add a couple of layers at a time. You don't want too much primer or too much paint in any given portion of this repair. Otherwise it'll run or sag and just look awful. It'll undo all of that careful work that you've done. Or more, looks like it might be more careful than mine because that repair is a little iffy. But onward. And the reason we're doing this is to seal the Bondo and the steel below so that they don't rust. And that is probably pretty good. All right, so we'll let that dry for 20 or so minutes and then we'll come back and lay down some color. So we've let our primer dry and plenty of time has passed. It's plenty dry. Now we're going to add our paint. Paint is actually typically the most expensive part of this process. The way you get paint to match your car is you take your VIN number into your dealership and you give them that VIN and they say, here's a spray can full of paint that matches your car. If it's a hard to find color or if it's an older car, you can actually take a paint sample in or your VIN number again to a paint shop and they will mix up paint for you and put it in an aerosol can. That's what I did with this. Since this is a metallic paint and it's a little bit older vehicle, this was a little expensive. This was a $70 can of paint. But at the same time, it's going to blend perfectly and it's going to save you a ton of money over getting it professionally sprayed. So just like with our primer, we're going to lay down a light tack layer, then add layers until it's built up and blends in with the rest of the paint. Keep your can about 6 to 8 inches away, light sweeping motions. This is actually, metallic is kind of the more challenging of the paints to blend because the way the metallic elements in the paint lay, it might be a little bit tough to get it perfect, but it'll get closer than having a dent in the paint. So we're going to let that dry for just a couple of seconds, let that set up, and then we'll add another layer. And like I said before, what we're doing here is feathering. You don't want too much paint at any time. You don't want it too heavy at any spot. You want to lightly blend it towards the edges. And just like I said before, if you're doing this on your car, you're going to want it masked off so that you don't get overspray everywhere. So that's another layer we'll throw down. And this is probably a pretty good pace. And you can probably see from there, it actually doesn't look like it's matching at all because of the fact that it's not shiny. It's just a matte surface. So that's actually what we're going to take care of in the next part. We're getting pretty close. As I said before, the repair tends to expand as you keep working. So that's matching pretty good. So we've got maybe 4 layers on there and we'll let that dry for 24 hours before we touch it. Mainly because you want to have it good and hard. You don't want it to peel off or anything like that. Because we don't have that kind of time on this show, we're going to actually move over to this side, which is already repaired. It's got a dent right in here somewhere. I got this one pretty well, but you can see that the finish here is really a bad matte finish. So we're going to wet sand it and then buff it to match the shine over here. Basically, this is just dull, and there's enough paint here that we can polish it to match this shine. In order to do that, we're going to work with wet sanding paper. This is a 1600 grit. And then we're going to move to a rubbing compound, which is basically super fine sandpaper, but in liquid form. So I've got my sandpaper on my sanding block. I'm going to use that rather than a buffing wheel because it's really easy to burn through paint with a buffing wheel. So on this application, we're just going to wet our, let's do it this way. We're going to wet our sandpaper. And basically you want to make sure to keep this whole surface wet because otherwise you'll end up burning through real quick. You're using the water as a lubricant basically. So real gently, you're going to start with this. You're not going to go hog wild. And again, what we're looking for is feathering. Going on the edges, real gentle. And this basically speeds up the polishing process. and that's probably enough. You don't want to go crazy. So make sure you have a towel handy and wipe it off. And you rub your hand across and you can feel it's already starting to get there. Over here, real heavy grit still. Over here, much, much smoother. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch to our rubbing compound. Like I said, this is basically sandpaper, super fine sandpaper in liquid form. So you dollop that on, you get your pad, and you start, this takes elbow grease, so you're going to rub this in circular pattern, again, overlapping the whole thing. So we've got one course in, and you can see sort of turned color there, and that's telling us that a little bit of paint's coming off, which is exactly what we want to see, actually. So you keep working that in, again, feathering that edge. There are a lot of ways to finish paint. This one is sort of the more aggressive manner. This is the heavy cut version of this, this compound, so more or less a more aggressive liquid sandpaper. After this one, you could go to a finer cut, and then same exact process. And then from there, a polish or wax. All right, so let's see where we're at. Let's get our towel back out, clean this off. It's definitely getting there. Maybe one more course. This takes a little bit of elbow grease if you really want to get into it. So the really nice thing about Bondo, and there is Bondo in here, that repair is somewhere in this area, is that it remains flexible even though it's hard. So while we're pushing in here, if you've done your repair right, it won't pop out. Like I said, a little elbow grease never hurts in this stage. Just be careful not to burn through it, or you'll have to start with another layer of paint. All right, we're definitely getting there. We've got this polished down with our aggressive cutting fluid, our polish fluid. We're going to switch to a fine cut. Same idea, just a finer grit. We're also going to switch to a fresh pad. So this is basically just a finer grit. I'm going to do the same thing. Remember to feather it on the edges. A professional shop would probably repaint this whole hood and then cover it with clear coat. That is a little bit more aggressive than what we want to do, and like I said before, way, way more expensive. For most cars, if you get the right paint match, this is just as good of a fix. You won't be able to tell the difference. Let's see where that gets us. What do we think? It's all right. I'm going to slap on some of this car polish just to see where that gets us. We're probably right about there as far as this repair goes. I'm going to use the other side of this pad so that we don't have a bunch of junk on it. And we'll rub that on. Let that set a couple seconds. Find a clean spot on our towel. Had to pick the white towel. And all right, we're getting pretty close, but we can do this all day. So with that, I think we've covered all the steps that you need to do a repair for yourself. You've probably saved $200 just with this one ding. It's really not that hard, just take some patience. If you have any questions about this job, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see if I can answer them.